The image you are currently seeing on screen is of a landfill in New Mexico, when the industry was most broken and on its deathbed. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of game cartridges were buried here, and most infamously, E.T., the extraterrestrial, was crushed and buried in concrete. It was quite literally a physical monument to a spectacular disaster, a crash that saw the video game industry worth over $3 billion vanish overnight, losing 97% of revenue in just 2 years since it began. For decades, we've looked back at this as a lesson learned, a story about how hubris, a flood of garbage games, and losing the trust of your audience will destroy the industry. We thought we got past this. I thought we got past this. But it appears that we have not. The same patterns we are seeing now mimic those of the 1983 crash. Now, there's not landfills being created, but we are seeing the same similar things. Broken studios, cancelled projects, burnt out careers of thousands of people, mass layoffs across the board. This is the video game industry in 2025 right now, and it feels very familiar to the one in 1983. In the chase for more profit, making the same mistakes that destroyed it in 1983. My name is Dark Ops, and today we're discussing how the industry as a whole is going to collapse by mimicking the same failure that it did 40 years ago. So for us to really understand why the first crash happened back 40 years ago, you have to picture the absolute madness of the early 1980s, when the industry was essentially just born. It's still blossoming, it's still a novel concept. So it wasn't necessarily a boom per se that happened before everything went to hell, but it was a gold rush of opportunity. Atari became the first to kick down the door with the 2600, and suddenly everybody wanted it. Everybody wanted to get in on the potential profits, especially considering that this was a market that was about to explode. With televisions becoming more common, this market was begging for more competition. Now, of course, you had the Atari 2600 as your main competitor. That was the main leader of the industry, considering it was still being built up by Atari. But that wasn't necessarily just it. It did not just end with the Atari. You see, while Atari was leading and they were the go-to console, they weren't the only ones. There were dozens of essentially make-offs, rip-offs you could say, of the console. As an example, I'm pretty sure you've likely heard of the ColecoVision. Nobody talks about it though, because it's essentially just a rip-off. It tried to do its own thing, however, it doesn't really diverge from what the Atari was. It's essentially just trying to copy its success and failing horribly. Another console I could bring up is the Magnavox Odyssey. I kid you not, some of these consoles are real, and it just seems so bizarre looking back at it, considering nobody really owns these consoles. They are just there to try and make a profit. And unfortunately, this problem became worse when you consider when you have a dozen other rip-off consoles at the same time, dozens of consoles on the market at the same time. It's very confusing to the average consumer, to parents who are buying this for their children. That was part of the reason. However, the consoles themselves weren't the problem here. Nobody really cared about the hardware specifically. It was the video games, the flood of video games that came in after Atari lost possibly the biggest lawsuit of its entire career in the company. After they lost this lawsuit, they couldn't stop anyone, and I mean anyone, from making games for their console, which essentially meant no quality assurance, so no QA testing, and anybody can make a game. Even if you had the budget of a shoestring, you can make a video game, publish it. No real love, care, or passion, just as long as you know how to code and put it on a damn cartridge, you can make any video game that you would like. And this certainly raised the floodgates for video games that are just complete rip-off scams hitting the market, which we now have a name for, thankfully. It's called shovelware. Shovelware is essentially low-quality, rushed, and completely broken games designed just to make some money off someone who doesn't know any better. I'm sure there's a few titles in the modern day that could fit this description, but I'm not going to go there because I've already talked about those games enough. But shovelware essentially made itself known during the 80s, and this certainly led to many, many other issues. The first, of course, being for consumers themselves, because consumers Back then, you don't have YouTube. You would have to read reviews through word of mouth or through magazines. So if you're looking for a new game, let's say you're on the block and you want to go get a new game for $35, right? You don't necessarily have any frame of reference for what you're going to be buying. So let's say you go into the store and you see, ooh, there's a video game from this company. Oh, I know this company. They make pet food, Purina. Wow, they just released a new game for the Atari? Wow, it's called Chase the Chuckwagon? Maybe I should try it out. Maybe it's a new game that looks pretty interesting. And that would go about as well as you would expect. So these weren't necessarily passion projects. They were just marketing ploys that treated games like disposable money. Essentially money so that they could make it back. They were essentially telling you to go screw yourself by releasing a product that has no reason to exist, no passion, only to rip off money from an industry that's about to bloom. So that's problem number one. Problem number two lies with actually the retailers themselves. You see, with retailers, when you have so many games that people either don't want or just have too many copies of because you overestimated demand, which we will be discussing later, they couldn't sell. So on the Atari Age forums, somebody who lived through it actually remembered it, and I'm going to pull up their quote here. Stores couldn't handle all of those games, so consumers just ignored video games entirely because they couldn't tell which were good and which were bad. Due to this led to bargain bins. We all know what bargain bins are now, but back then, this got significantly worse. Games that were once sold for the price, like I said, $35 or $100 in 2025, they were dumped into the bargain bins at $5 a piece like candy. That destroyed any value these games might have had. Even if the games were actually really good, they had no value because people weren't going to buy regardless. They were scared they were just going to be buying more garbage. So you're essentially at this point where you're producing games at a high price, but nobody wants it for the high price, and because there's so many games out on the market, you would just have to go with the face value of, let's say, $5. So no value whatsoever, and why would anyone risk paying the premium price for a new release when they could just grab like 5 of them off of the bargain bin? The trust was gone, and the industry was now about to hit one of the biggest recessions in history. Right at the center of all of this, you wouldn't believe, is Atari itself. Atari, the industry leader at one point, essentially the one who created this industry that we all love and share, they're the ones who fumbled the entire bag. Their new CEO at the time, Raymond Kassar, was a guy from a completely different industry, the textile industry, believe it or not, which has nothing to do with what we are talking about. But I promise you it does relate to the story. Their CEO, Raymond Kassar, he had nothing but the most profound contempt for his own developers. Infamously, he once told his developers, his programmers, his best top programmers at Atari, the guys who would leave in disgust for what he said, he once said that you are no more important to a game than the one who develops it on the assembly line. Essentially saying that you developing the game have no more value than the one who assembles the cartridge. The disrespect was so profound that those who left became Activision, essentially forming one of the most grittiest companies in the world because they had contempt for this guy. This led to one of the biggest disasters ever, and he still did not look back at all once. He never took this quote back. He forever holds this idea that you have less value than those who assemble the game rather than the ones who produced it in the first place. This attitude, combined with the port of Pac-Man from the arcades to the Atari, led to another flop, because Atari, thinking that they were the best, manufactured 12 million copies of Pac-Man. Now, if you've done your research, you would know that only 10 million people owned the console in 1982, which means that there were about 2 million oversold copies and 5 million unsold copies of the game itself. So that's still a million couple units sold. But again, you have these copies that nobody bought and copies that no one could have bought because you overestimated demand. Pac-Man was a disaster, but E.T. was the camel's back, essentially. The story is so legendary, everybody knows E.T. as one of the most broken games of all time, essentially an industry killer. That's how bad it was. Not even because of what it is, but because of everything surrounding it, okay? The story around this game is legendary. After paying almost $25 million, which at the time was one of the highest payments for a video game license ever, they gave the developer 5 weeks to develop the game. a month and a week to develop it and publish it. This result led into one of the most frustrating, confusing messes where you mostly, literally, just fell into pits. That's it. That's the whole game. And Atari, again, thinking the name would sell it. This pattern of overestimation on demand and overproducing would lead into the complete crash that we saw, losing billions and billions of dollars, losing hundreds of millions of possible consumers because of your own arrogance. E.T. did not sell. Yes, it made 1.5 million units sold. However, once again, they overproduced the amount of copies that they thought they were going to sell, making 4 million copies. So you have apparently 2.5 million just out there, possibly more. These are the numbers I've gathered. Possibly more copies out there nobody bought. You have at least over 1 million units sold, but that doesn't matter when you keep overestimating demand and assuming that everybody and their mother is going to go purchase a copy of E.T. That is the exact problem that they kept ignoring, overestimating demand and producing more than people are going to buy, leading to bargain bins everywhere. $5 games, even if the game was good, still out there. It would lead to a flood of games that people just weren't selling. And since people weren't selling or buying, the trucks came. In September 1983, the trucks came in with the games that were not sold, and millions of copies were just thrown into the trash. Quite literally thrown into the trash. And now people just forget about these games because it was a forgotten industry at this point. And you would be forgiven for thinking that the industry was dead, because at this point nobody wanted to play it anymore. No one wanted to buy games because most of them were crap, and there was no quality assurance. No quality telling if there's going to be a good game or not, and since you couldn't tell, why even bother paying? Why bother paying for an industry that stopped caring? While the Western world of development had pretty much died out at this point, Japan came in to save the day. Everyone knows them, Nintendo. Nintendo's revival of the industry wasn't just built on the fact that the industry was close to death, if not on the borderline of death, but also on the fact that Nintendo had complete control of what they were doing. In 1985, the word video game itself was even toxic. Retailers wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. So, for Nintendo to get out their new machine, their very first console, the Nintendo Entertainment System, into stores, Nintendo actually had to trick people into buying it, essentially. Not necessarily trick, but they had to change the name and not directly call it a console like many others did, where just calling it a console, people would just avoid outright. They had to change the name. And so, that's how we got the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, not the Nintendo Video Game Console. Could you imagine if it was called Nintendo Video Game Console? I don't think that flows off the tongue very well. I think NES was probably the right move. But either way, they had to call it the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, to get it into stores, to get more retailers to buy into it. And they also did double the work by making it so that you could load cartridges from the front, like a VCR, for those who know what a VCR is. And so it looked more respectable instead of a toy or a cheap gimmick like video games were pretty much seen as by the end of 1985. A key sticker you might have actually seen before was the real foundation for all this work though, and how Nintendo grew to have such great success after the industry essentially collapsed on itself. The gold sticker itself, the original Nintendo seal of quality. This was essentially a promise to consumers and parents who were burned by Atari and their collapse that the game inside isn't broken. It's not going to be complete garbage. It's going to have some quality assurance, some real quality control for once. Now, don't get me wrong, this does not mean that every game for the NES was great or perfect by any means. However, what this did mean, it was essentially telling people that the NES would be approving games as it came along. So Nintendo themselves had to check what was coming onto the console. They enforced this with silicon, what you might have known as the lockout chip, the 10NES lockout chip, or a digital key. This basically meant that if an official game cartridge didn't have Nintendo's official chip inside, the console would not play it. Simple as that. It would refuse to play, so you would have to go through Nintendo to actually get the game published, or at the very least checked, before it came onto the console itself. This gave Nintendo complete iron control over software, something that Atari never had and completely lost, which is how it fumbled into the 80s. This is something that Nintendo used grievously. They use this very much so. Their licensing terms were some of the They were very restrictive, you might say. And for good reason, of course, given that the industry needed to be revived with careful precision. So this is what you could see. Publishers like Konami, Capcom, in their early golden days, right, when they were first born, they were limited to releasing only a few games per year, so they couldn't pump out endless crap and try to make profit off mass numbers. They couldn't do that anymore. If you want to go through Nintendo, they had to approve all the games that you published and only a few at a time per given year. And on top of this, of course, they also added in some censorship. Let me just give an example. Religious symbols were a big no-no back in the day. You could not have any religion or many references to religion in your games. So in the original Final Fantasy games, when they were coming out, the holy spell was actually named to fade just to go along with Nintendo's privacies, to go with their licenses. So that's why you see the holy spell and the fade spell, they're the same thing, but they changed the name because Nintendo essentially didn't like it. They didn't like the fact that you could have something like that in their game. That was something they were afraid of. And of course, you also saw something in Castlevania when that was coming out as well. Crosses were essentially gone from Dracula's castle. You couldn't see it anywhere. It was gone. Completely removed as though they were never there in the first place. Just a few examples. Light censorship, but still censorship. It was very restrictive, but they had to play it safe. And here's another thing, right? The seal of quality never guaranteed that the game was actually going to be quality. Like I said earlier, it doesn't mean every game is going to be perfect, 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10. It doesn't mean it's going to be a good game. All it means is essentially it has quality assurance. And quality assurance is something that I think many developers today take for granted, many consumers take for granted, is the fact that we have QA testing for video games. Nintendo had to enforce that themselves back in the day. So if you saw a seal from Nintendo that said seal of quality or seal of Nintendo Entertainment, this was an assurance to many people, because this was also telling retailers that Nintendo had gotten its cut. The higher quality of games was pretty much a side effect of that seal. And by limiting how much you could actually produce instead of mass amounts, Nintendo forced publishers to actually be careful, investing more into each of their games, instead of just producing the bare minimum but making a mass amount. They essentially masterfully created a system where their own financial interests aligned perfectly with the consumer to create a product that was reliable and could also have quality assurance that the games that they were going to be buying or will be getting weren't going to be complete crap, complete unmastered, somebody from JavaScript producing these kind of games. So just doing all this, Nintendo not only saved the industry, they invented what we know as the modern industry with this walled garden practice that many companies still use, like Apple and other companies like that. This business model defined console gaming, and it still does to this day. That's what exclusives are for in the first place. Sony, Microsoft, they all operate under the same way that Nintendo created in the 80s. They control the platform, they control the storefront that you use, even though Microsoft is being a little loose about that, and they take a cut of everything. And Apple especially also takes 30%. It's a stable system. It's built on control and not necessarily freedom, but for good reason. If you let too much freedom, you get another crash where people just won't buy anything because they're too afraid everything has no quality assurance. So that is essentially what Nintendo did to bring back the industry and inventing the system that we see to this day, which does work. But on the other hand, it does lead into other issues. Big ones that are manifesting to this day.
Having grown up in the company, I had a pretty good sense of the company. And while from the outside looking in, it looked like we were in a really, really bad place. And so what we did was we sat down and we said, okay, now every time you have to make a decision, every time you sift through some level of information, or you have to try and think about how to move some initiative forward, ask yourself this question first. Is this good for the player? 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 No!
Okay, jokes aside, this is where we really get to the modern day gaming, essentially where the past of that crash and the present really start to come together. So as we discussed earlier, shovelware is just a bunch of crap that nobody is going to be paying for, but it's going to exist in mass. You know, there's going to be a million different versions of the same crap that no one's going to be buying. Essentially useless software that people don't want. However, this never really died out. I'm sure you've still heard of the term, but it's sort of changed its meaning ever since the 80s, entering into the 90s, 2000s, and modern day. So, nowadays, you can get games digitally, you can get physical copies. They'll always be available for you to purchase right now. It's not like bargain bins where you kind of have to look for them maybe at a Walmart or a Target. No, if you want to get a game, you can go purchase one right now. It can exist, it functions, it looks maybe pretty good through advertising. It does look pretty good, so maybe you should play it. Hell, maybe it's at a lower price point. Maybe the blueprint for this comes directly from a different form of gaming. That form of gaming, my friend, is called mobile gaming. This kind of shovelware is beyond predatory. It is one of the reasons that monetization in gaming has gone to where it is today. So you would think, maybe it's not so bad. I mean, after all, the game is looking pretty innocent enough. Okay, it starts pretty innocent. It's not too bad. Maybe I can play a little bit, grind up to get my characters. No. Okay, so does anybody remember those machines in Japan? So for anyone who's been to Japan or has done a little bit of research, you know those gachapon machines in Japan that essentially give you a random toy? Or maybe at a supermarket where you just put in a coin, you get a random capsule toy. Yeah, that's how it was back when you actually played with physical toys. That evolved into the gaming market. The term gacha in mechanics in mobile games, you essentially spend money for the random chance to get one powerful item or character that you want. It's random, and you never know what you're going to get. They might tell you the percentage of the chance you might get it, but you're never going to get a guaranteed opportunity. You don't get to select what you want. It's a random chance. You spend a little bit of currency, or in some cases, virtual currency that you have to buy with money to get that character that you want, or item, or weapon, or whatever, right? And let's just be honest, let's call it what it is. It's a slot machine. It uses the same psychological hook as a slot machine. The same thing that keeps people pulling the lever in, I don't know, Las Vegas or any gambling site whatsoever. That is essentially what it's doing to the gaming industry, what it's been doing, and it started off innocently, right? And then it pulls you into it. Keep pulling the lever, maybe a higher chance of getting what you want. The next one I'll surely win. The next one I'll surely get that character that I want if I just spend a little bit more. That's the entire hook of gacha, and that's what it's turning into the new shovelware. That's essentially what it's turning into. This model has been a mobile staple for years, okay? It's always been a thing about mobile games to be cheap, to be kind of cash grabs. That's always been the thing. However, what no one would think is that it's going to come into fully priced games, coming into the other parts of the industry. Everybody knows that mobile games aren't exactly too profitable. Whatever, fine. You can keep doing these practices even though they're still scummy as hell, and there's still laws regarding that in many parts of the world. But fine, you can stay in mobile games. At least they're free. You don't have to pay. You can just optionally pay for that stuff. Whatever people want to excuse it with, that's how the gacha mechanics work in mobile games. However, we saw this come into AAA $60, $70 games now, and it has infected parts of the industry, and it refuses to leave. To this day, it will not leave. We saw this firstly in many other games, but we saw this biggest form of loot boxes in full price AAA games, if you want to even call it AAA, and this was a huge, big problem. Let's bring out the most infamous example of this crap. Star Wars Battlefront 2 EA. The gacha model bolts it onto a premium game for $60, and this was such a big deal that the community backlash, not only is it the most disliked comment on Reddit, the most downvoted at over 600,000 downvotes, but Disney had to come in to tell EA to stop. They had to pull out the mainstream media because people were so upset about this. Because gacha mechanics, where you pay to essentially get better at the game, they had to pull out other corporations to tell EA that they have to knock it off. The industry learned from this initially. They got better. They got more subtle about it. However, this never left. It was temporarily pulled from stores and then came back. And it still exists to this day. And it delivers in such a subtle way, such a mechanical way, that you wouldn't even notice it. I've made multiple videos discussing the Battle Pass, but let's talk about it more in depth here. The Battle Pass was first popularized by Dota 2 and perfected by Fortnite. It's essentially manipulative at the micro level because it replaces the gambling of loot boxes, the purchasing of specific loot boxes to try to get what you want, and replaces that with a long reward track. If you play longer, you can get the track, you can get these extra rewards, and you can even pay for premium rewards. But the hook is still there. The fear of missing out, or FOMO. If you want to get this skin at a certain tier, or if you want to get these certain items specifically at certain tiers, you're going to have to grind for it. And of course, that's not necessarily a bad thing on its own. Of course, you want to have replay value for your game. But the problem with the Battle Pass, right, even though it's in free games, which is where it should have stayed, in free-to-play games, it's not there anymore. It's in every other game now because of how manipulative it is. Instead of having outright loot boxes that you have to pay for and look scummy on paper, you can instead do what Fortnite does with the Battle Pass, where you have this long track, you can earn rewards, but fear of missing out is key here. The key here is that you're afraid that you're not going to get a skin at a certain tier. You have to grind for it, and before the season ends. Now, the seasons aren't necessarily short, but you're going to have to play quite often to even get what you want. And if you just have the misfortune of not having Wi-Fi or unable to play for multiple days due to other problems in your life, guess what? You lose it forever. You don't ever get the chance to ever get it again. So that fear of missing out is not necessarily a good thing that they might thought it was, because it just turns the game into essentially a job, an obligation. If I paid for the Battle Pass, or if I was given the Battle Pass, I essentially have to be stressed to play it because I have to get to a certain tier before the season ends. What if I'm busy, or what if multiple people are, what if the servers are down? Things like that. Things out of your control. The fear of missing out is weaponized against you. That's the problem. You're no longer playing for fun. You're playing to protect the money you already spent on the Battle Pass. The problem with these kind of tactics is that they're from a free-to-play environment, the mobile industry where games are essentially all free to play, where the goal is essentially to appeal to what I would like to call the lowest common denominator of engagement. So short, simple, repeatable loops that are easy to monetize, and you can't get out of it because the game, again, is free to play. There's no other alternative. These developers have to make money. If it's free to play, they have to find a way to monetize it. What better way to monetize it than through the fear of missing out through the Battle Pass, or just outright doing both, doing loot boxes and the fear of missing out through specific events. The goal is no longer to sell you or give you a complete game with a satisfying conclusion, beginning, middle, end, or experience. The goal is to capture your attention span, your little attention span. They want to keep you on essentially a hamster wheel and provide you with an endless series of opportunities to spend money. Why not spend $2 or $5 on cosmetics? Why not do that, huh? Just keep spending a little bit more money. You'll look better. You'll be happier with yourself. Hell, spend on the Battle Pass. Spend on an extra Battle Pass so you can get even more cosmetics. Why not keep doing that, huh? Instead of actually having fun with the game itself and then considering maybe getting cosmetics. The game has not been developed for your entertainment. It's been developed so that you'll spend more money in a game that's either free or it costs money and it still has this on top of that, essentially making double the profit off of your experience. This is the part where we have to look at ourselves. If these practices are so hated, right, the loot boxes fiasco, the cosmetics that are way too overpriced and that should be earnable, if they're so hated, why is it so profitable for companies to keep doing this? How is it that companies can keep getting away with charging more for less or putting more gambling tactics into our video games? Like 2K, NBA, all this stuff, they add in such grindy tactics into games that are not, first of all, aren't free, which shouldn't be an excuse anyway because it's still grindy and manipulative. And secondly, again, these tactics shouldn't exist. It should be something that anyone can earn fairly. Make the game fun and then maybe consider, adding this in post-release. But not when you're trying to make a complete game at release. So how is it that they keep profiting from this? Well, I'll tell you. It's called mindless consumerism. Essentially, the consumer, anyone who doesn't purchase without thinking about it, thinking about what it is they're exactly buying. And this is very frustrating because if you go onto social media or on YouTube and people don't like a specific series like, I don't know, Call of Duty that always comes out every year, no matter what, even during pandemics, no matter what a new Call of Duty is coming out, even if people hate it, people will buy it. People will buy whatever they put out, no matter what. Let's look at Modern Warfare 3 from 2023. Even though that Call of Duty had great post-launch support, at release, people called it, a glorified DLC, a one-of-a-kind terrible game, 1.7 out of 10 on Metacritic at times, it was still the second best-selling game in the US and topped most charts. It was still very profitable despite the fact that they took the basis of Modern Warfare 2, put it into Modern Warfare 3, put in Modern Warfare 2 maps from 2009. Essentially, they are blatantly telling you that they are going to repackage and sell it to you. And yes, you can have fun with this. You can like whatever you want. You're always allowed to purchase or buy whatever you want. That's not the issue. But when you're at this point where you're constantly complaining, wanting to see change, and then buying the next one anyways, hoping it will get better. Last year it didn't get better. This year it might get better. Next year it might get better. It's causing this issue that we are seeing, that they will focus on monetization, and if you don't like it, someone else will take your place and just buy it anyways. And they'll make up the money. They will still make record profit regardless. And this is happening especially with sports games. Let's look at Madden NFL. Some of the worst user reviews you'll see for any franchise belong to Madden because of the microtransactions, the lack of change, the core gameplay remaining the same for years, and yet it's still always at the top of the sales charts. Every single year, without fail, it's either FIFA, Madden, NBA, 2K, whatever it is. I probably repeated myself a couple times. It always tops the sales charts every single time. You can look at reviews right now of 2K25, 2.5 stars, but people still buy it and play it. Why do people keep doing this? And why do people keep buying and complaining, then buying all over again? Is it habit? Is it brand loyalty? Is it social pressure? Is it the only game that people play and you want to, of course, join them so that you have others to play with? What is the answer to this? Well, for a lot of people, it can be many of these different things. I myself play a lot of single player games. I don't usually play a lot of online multiplayer. So for me, I'm okay with this. I'm fine with going to my own games and playing whatever it is I want. But for others, it's kind of like an addiction. Kind of like keep giving, but not receiving. On a forum discussing this, you can actually see some people talk about this a little bit. It's an addiction. It's trying to chase a high that we once had. We keep buying the new installment and hope it'll get better. Maybe Modern Warfare 2, it'll get better. Modern Warfare 3, it'll get better. Black Ops 6, 7, 8. It's the same cycle over and over again. And unfortunately, the publishers know this. They know they can survive bad press. Even Activision, who was sued for sexual harassment, survived that. Because people will keep showing up no matter what. The core player base does not care. They will show up no matter what. Your outrage doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you say or do. The mindless consumers who will flock to these games in numbers will keep paying because there's no incentive for them to change. A lot of this actually does have to do with a future topic. But for now, I'll leave this chapter with this. If you truly want change, the best thing you can do, right? Boycotting won't work. The fact of the matter is that boycotting games, first of all, it doesn't do anything to the publishers. But second of all, vote with your voice. Say what you want. Be heard, okay? Try to make a stand. I personally am not going to be playing Call of Duty for a very long time now. Black Ops 6 will be the final Call of Duty I play. You can check on this channel again if that happens. I will not be playing it. I'm taking a stand. I'm done with paying every single year, hoping for change and getting nothing. You should do the same. Just try to do what you think is best for the industry. Because at the end of the day, the core player base will always show up no matter what. No matter what we do. No matter how many of these videos published. No matter how much bad press. It doesn't matter. There's no incentive for them to change. So unfortunately, that's just how it is with mindless consumerism in the modern day. That's just how it is. This subject is hard for me to start discussing. This I've done many videos on, and there's more news going out about Microsoft and more layoffs. So this will be a bit more of a somber, perhaps turn into a rant. So if you wish to skip through this part, I will leave timestamps for the chapters in the description. This is where we get into more about how this is affecting real developers and people who actually develop these games, the people who are often forgotten in the name of money. This is where we're at the human cost of development. The industry is not just repeating the same mistakes that we just talked about, it's also putting it on the developers. What I call the modern day of gaming is the age of mismanagement. And the currency is the careers of people who pour their hearts, souls, blood, tears into these games that we love, enjoy, and pay for. In just 2023 alone, which had many great games, mind you, Baldur's Gate 3, Spider-Man 2, a great year for gaming. Over 10,000 were laid off. The first few months of this year that I also covered were worse. This isn't just a correction. This essentially is a bloodbath for these developers. We've seen so many studios like Volition, the original creators of Saints Row, remember that original trilogy, that no longer exists. And another one that we just saw from Microsoft was Arcane Austin. The developers of Prey were shut down for seemingly no real reason. Microsoft never really explained exactly why, other than they had to shut down the studio. And not just that, behind these headlines are thousands of actual people who had families and mortgages. There are many developers you can talk about regarding this. I've actually tried to speak with many regarding the layoffs just at the beginning of this year as well, and the beginning of last year. So many people laid off for toxic work cultures, for environments that were just simply not healthy. A veteran developer I had the pleasure of speaking with described being laid off twice in 1 year from companies that just simply had toxic work cultures, ones that were impossible to meet with or work in, simply because they're just not fair for everybody. They're just unfair, and they're very, very hard on those who are just trying to earn money to pay the bills, essentially. And another who lost his job just gave up on games altogether, deciding to find a job that would just be stable. Can you blame him for this? Can you blame anybody who thinks like this, who just wants to give up on game development and find a job that was actually stable, to put money on the table, to, actually have a roof over their heads? Can you blame them for this? I certainly don't. And the justifications we hear from these executives are predatory and completely disconnected from the reality of the day, of the reality of what's going on with these people. Let's talk about Phil Spencer for a moment, if I may. I do not have a good relationship with Microsoft. I think you guys know this. I do not like what they have been pulling in the last couple of years, and for good reason. Some of the statements this man has made and has been suggesting since he became CEO has been so blatantly obvious to developers that you shouldn't develop for him or his company. I've never seen, not even Andrew Wilson, pull statements like these. These are just blatantly telling you to go screw yourself. That's essentially what he's saying. So we can essentially confirm that Phil Spencer was saying, what he was discussing multiple times over, that the industry isn't growing at the insane rate that it used to. And since, of course, these are publicly traded companies that answer to Wall Street, whatever you want to call it, they have to cut costs to keep shareholders happy with how the company is doing. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like shareholders aren't going to be really happy when you spend $70 billion and then have to go back on it and cut multiple people from that $70 billion just to cut costs. And on top of this, you're also laying off studios from that same deal just so that these layoffs can continue to happen and please shareholders, which leads to less development games, and you're producing less but spending more, and this cycle becomes vicious. An exponential rate of letting people go, only to let more people go because you don't have people to develop games, which leads to a loss in money. It's an exponential rate of losing people and leading to what we see today regarding the mass layoffs across the board. Sony's president Hiroki Totoki was even more blunt about this, basically calling out his own studios for not making enough money and not understanding how to generate sustainable profit. Hence why we saw so many live service games go down the shitter, except for Concord, which somehow made it to release only to be pulled 2 weeks later. You didn't even get paid yet. It got pulled before they could actually make any sustainable profit. How is that possible? Somebody explain to me how you could spend so much money on a video game, pull it back, and then close the studio. How is that possible, Sony? Is it the amount of money spent? Or is it the development costs or the ideas from the team? Nothing seems to encapsulate this sheer mind-boggling arrogance better than the peanut butter on bread excuse, and I promise I'm trying not to laugh when I say that. But that was used by the new head of Xbox, Matt Booty, to justify closing multiple studios, including Tango Gameworks, which just released Hi-Fi Rush and was considered a massive success, and then they got shut down. They were allegedly working on a sequel, giving it to Phil Spencer and Matt Booty, and they both said no. They both denied development of the game. Why this ever happened, I will never know. I've honestly tried to research why this happened, and I have no tangible idea how this could have happened. They made a success with Hi-Fi Rush, and then the studio gets shut down? What happened here? Well, let me pull a quote from Matt Booty himself, okay? So, according to him, the project was shut down, even though it was a passion project, because leadership was spread too thin, like peanut butter on bread, and they needed to close these successful studios to make management easier. So, in other words, you put in the time to invest in this, and the developers worked their asses off. They paid the price for making a great, critically acclaimed game, and you know what they get paid for? They get fired. They lose, not only do they lose their jobs, the studio no longer exists. It's either acquired or it's dissolved entirely. This is the exact same contempt for creators that we saw from Ray Kacer at Atari. Remember at Atari when he had so much profound contempt for the actual developers that they left? Here we essentially see the opposite, in that the studio gets shut down for the company they were working for, the company they were developing for. It gets shut down. It's just repackaged and insulted with some of the most corporate speak I've ever seen. It is unbelievably corporate. It is jargon. It is complete nonsense. And the fact that they even got away with this is what I find to be the funniest part about this whole thing, because they made a critically acclaimed game for once, even after the failure of Halo and other studios that just no longer exist anymore, and they want to produce Hi-Fi Rush and then shut down the studio. Where is the profit to be made there? You would make more profit just producing the damn sequel instead of shutting down the studio again for what I would assume to be the 5th time now. Arcane Studios is gone, and now you're just going to do this with Tango Gameworks? Why? I truly don't understand. That, to me, symbolizes the death, the consequence of dying creativity. When creativity is killed, the AAA space is becoming very stagnant, and I think it's becoming quite obvious to most of us, especially with the release and trailer for Black Ops 7, the 7th of the Black Ops game, and the 20th? It's in the 20s now. I've lost track of how many sequels there are in this damn franchise. That is how stagnant this is becoming. When everything is either a sequel, a remake, or a safe bet. When one flop can essentially get your studio shut down because they spent either a ridiculous amount of money, like Concord, $300 million to produce a game that doesn't make any profit. It loses the money that they put into the game in the first place. Why would you ever take a risk? There's no reason to take chances now. If you take chance with passion, you get rewarded with a studio closure. This is exactly why we're seeing so many big budget games that look and play identically. A lot of criticism Sony actually faces with having adventure action games is that they play the same, but there's a reason why. People love them, people buy them, and you make profit. Depending on the profit, you might get more sequels, like, I don't know, the Uncharted series, you get like 4+ games in there, and depending on the profit, you might not get as many games, like the Infamous series, which I personally loved, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to get any more sequels in there. So you have to play it safe, which is rather unfortunate, because this is why we also see an open world checklist formula, and you see this with many other games as well. Ghost of Tsushima, which I played a ton of and personally loved, has this formula. It's unfortunate. It plays it safe, even though I absolutely love the setting, the creativity. You still see this kind of checklist that open worlds have to follow and copy and paste, so that it makes a profit, so that it plays it safe and can capture the biggest audience with the least amount of risk. Now that's just the AAA space, okay? Luckily, when we're seeing this happen, just like in the 80s, that stagnation is gonna fuel a competitor, another part of the industry to rise up and help survive the environment, help the industry grow. The indie developers, where you can see real creativity happening right now, and developers who left from Atari, to form Activision, we're seeing a rise of unionization, workers demanding a seat at the table. The workers' strike we just saw, the actors' strike, all this sort of stuff happening is very good, because it means that developers are given more rights, and you can actually hear what they have to say. You can hear the fact that they don't want to be used just for money and then to be let go. You're actually seeing them rise for themselves, and that's a huge difference compared to the 80s, where developers were essentially treated as side things. You either produced a game or you make no money. Just produce what you want to produce and then get the hell out of here. But today, you can finally see some action taking on, and I highly encourage this, because this is really going to help the industry and stop corporate jargon, essentially, from happening over and over. Like we just saw with Tango Gameworks, We're seeing an industry that's changing all the time, and it's good that we can have these sorts of things where we can discuss developers and that they're given the chance, the spotlight to actually demand more from companies who make billions of dollars and give the bare minimum to their employees. And that's not even going into how leadership is handled at these companies, because that in itself could be an entire other essay video, not even regarding that. The fact is, unionization is a good thing. The fact that we're seeing it happen more is the biggest change that's going to prevent another crash. But the similarities are all there from 2025 and 1983. Hopefully it just doesn't lead to one. However, I have my doubts considering the price hikes across the board and, how people are becoming more complacent with purchasing games. It's an issue that's going to pop up eventually, and I'm very scared to see what will happen if things continue to go at the rate they are. If we're going to have AAA games that just flat out don't offer you anything. I mean, if you can pull a game like Conquered with, again, I have to keep using this example because of the budget and the utter failure that game was. If you're going to put that much money, pull the game away before it even makes any revenue whatsoever, and then shut down the studio? What confidence does that say about the space that we're in right now, where a AAA game can get pulled just like that, where it literally just doesn't make a difference whether you develop it or not? You're fired anyway. You get let go. You don't even get paid. It says something when you put 8 years and then you don't get anything back for it, and the company gets dissolved from another company, and the corporation doesn't even care about you or look at you at all. It really does say something about our industry right now, and it does go back to 1983 a lot in those ways, in that we're just seeing a industry that desperately needs healing very, very badly. So, with all that being said, the video game industry won't be as dead as it was in 1983. It will never head into a financial collapse that big, not for the foreseeable future, just because of how massive the industry is, making more than the film and music industries combined. It's never going to head that deep a hole. It will survive. We will see a surviving gaming industry. But surviving and being a healthy industry are two very, very different things. What we've seen since 2020 isn't just a crisis of financial gain. It's a crisis of how we can sustain companies, leadership, how we can have confidence in these AAA studios. How are you supposed to have confidence when they can just lay you off at the flick of a hay? Or with AI taking over, with blatant examples from companies like Activision just giving you AI bundles. How do you survive in an industry like that? How do you sustain one like that? How are you supposed to support developers if you're not even given the chance to? Because behind the scenes, they can't do anything about it. The industry is digging itself into another landfill, just like you saw. It's not just with plastic cartridges, it's the wasted potential for the generation of developers that could have existed. A digital graveyard with the code of thousands of games that could have existed. Scalebound for one, or the other games that just never came out. It could have been awesome. It could have been amazing if these got to see the light of day. Hi-Fi Rush 2, anything like that. It could have been amazing, but they were all disposed like tools. The crash of 1983, when you boil it down, was a failure of product and demand. Essentially, when you produce too much, way too much, and the industry's just not ready. But the crisis today is a failure of pure management. Whether or not the industry will continue to make money I don't think it's a debate. I think the industry will always make money. The companies here have figured out monetization perfectly. You can monetize any game, paid game, $70, $80. You can monetize whatever you want. It will make money so long as you cycle in that monetization. The question is whether it will be worth even working in, or if the art it produces is even worth it at all. The industry survived 1983 by learning to control what's produced. To survive today, it has to learn to value its developers, because if it doesn't, the next thing that might go down, not just the industry, but whether or not it's even just creativity. Is it in art form? Is developing games in art form? Probably not anymore. If it's just going to be AI produced garbage, or if it's just companies producing things for the sake of making profit, one after the other. Every developer needs to make money. Every company exists to make money. That's not the issue. It's the creativity and passion and giving developers a chance to produce games that we need to discuss. Because if all these things are just shut down in the name of money, is this really an industry? Or are we just paying money to corporate? Are we just giving corporate any amount of money so that we can get a little bit of dopamine and then come back next year to get more dopamine, and then next year and then next year, giving you less for more, or you're paying more for less? That's something I really like to say, and something that Angry Joe brings up a lot in his videos, which I highly recommend. If you watch any amount of this video, go watch some of his videos as well against this corporate practice, because it just proves my point that the corporates do not care about developers, which in itself leads into poorer products, leading to more shutdowns, less money across the board, and less creativity as a whole. It really is a damn shame to see this. So to wrap up this video and to kind of put it into a final conclusion here to end this entire little segment, ultimately the gaming industry will not die in terms of monetary value. The monetization practices that have evolved in the last decade or so, and the undeniable fact that we live in an era where sequels, reboots, and remakes are guaranteed cash cows for the most part. Of course, there are exceptions here and there. You know which ones I'm talking about. Aside from those, it's a guaranteed cash cow to kill creativity. And the industry will continue to make money and be financed, but the art form of gaming developing and what makes this a hobby for all of us to love and share, that's going to die at some point. Whether it be through the use of AI being replacing jobs entirely, or just the fact that we'll never see original IPs be developed, either through lack of support, lack of marketing, or lack of any support from the actual companies themselves, not just from, consumers, but from developers like Microsoft, who won't give sequels a chance, or cancel really good looking projects like Scalebound from 2014. Projects like that look amazing, but don't ever see the light of day, because it's not a safe bet. It's taking a risk. And unfortunately, taking a risk seems to be something no company is willing to do. And if no company is ever going to be willing to do this, I feel that the industry will definitely be at a point where we don't see it die, but rather just a corpse of a hobby that we all loved and shared, but now has become monotonous and something that's not really fun anymore. Not really something that you can play or just pick up and play like the old days. I don't mean to harp in those who say that the older games are better than newer games. That's not what I'm saying at all. Obviously, we just saw multiple Game of the Years that have been absolutely fantastic. Baldur's Gate 3, and this year is looking like Expedition 33. Really good games across the board. That's not the issue. The issue is that when you look at as a whole, to put this into kind of a retrospective, as a whole, the industry right now is far more poisoned with these subjects than it was decades ago, mimicking very similar behavior to how it was with no quality assurance or quality control until someone came in, i.e. Nintendo, to make sure that we actually had these assurances. We might need that again, whether it be through some government intervention, which no, please get the government out of here with gaming. We don't need more of that. But we need something. There has to be something done to hold these companies accountable and say, treat your developers well. Give community support. Give these projects a chance instead of canceling them before they ever get to see the light of day. Things like that is what I'm trying to end this video off with. Because at the end of the day, obviously these all are out of my control. This is out of our control. But it's still nice to say something. I think something still has to be said. I think the power of your voice definitely shines a lot more than boycotting or anything like that, because boycotting doesn't, like I said, the power of the masses, mindless consumerism will always win. But your voice, I think, really does matter here. And hopefully, if you've come this far into the video, I hope you at least have something in mind for whether a game you support or not, whether you're going to buy it or not, or show the fact that you are willing to take a stand in one way or another, or just be a smart consumer with gaming is all I'm trying to say. But that's ultimately where I'm going to leave it off. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I know it's been very, very long, and also very long since I uploaded. This one was a passion project of mine, so if there was anything about this video that you liked, then please let me know in the comments below. This took a really long time to make, on top of some other things going on, but I promise I will be coming back. This video is just the start of newer videos coming out soon. I promise I'll be there more consistently. This was really something I wanted to get out, so I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like more style videos like this, let me know in the comments as well. I seriously appreciate every single one of you, especially when we hit 750 subscribers the other day, and I did make a post about it on the community page, but I did want to celebrate it as well, so thank you guys so much for that. Absolutely mind-boggling numbers there. 750 I can't even process, and we're still continuing to grow. I think at this moment we're around 755, 756. Absolutely crazy numbers what I've been got for the last month. So again, I really apologize for that. Things have just been, really going on, but I have no real excuses there. So I have to just say more videos are on the way, and videos like this are really fun to make as well. So I just wanted to put that out there because I really do love making videos and making videos like this as well, just for you guys to listen and hear me out. So thank you guys so much for watching. This is Dark Ops, and I'll see you guys soon. Dark Ops out.